Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my quarterfinals ranking for the BookTube prize. I don't think I saw another video for the group that I judged for the octafinals, but I've seen plenty so far for the group I judged this round, and I can't wait to watch and comment. The BookTube prize is an annual award where the BookTube community can come together and judge last year's best in literary fiction and nonfiction. It takes place over several months so that judges can whittle down a list of 96 to 2. The quarterfinals are the second round, and I judged for nonfiction Group C. I'll link to my announcement video down below. Just like with the octafinals, I enjoyed all of the books in my group. Yet protocol insisted I had to choose favorites. Surprisingly, for the second time in a row, my top 3 books were the ones from my group that advanced to the next round. I'm like the oracle of the BookTube prize. Or maybe half oracle, because all of my picks from the octafinals were eliminated this round. Alas. I'm going to talk about these books in the order that I ranked them, starting with the last one, so number 6. It's Parkland by David Cullen. This is a book about the gun control movement in the U.S., and specifically about the student activists from Stoneman Douglas High School. After a brief account of the shooting and a little bit of history about their suburb in Florida, Cullen got around to following some of the leaders as they took on their state government and then Washington, D.C. There was a lot of powerful stuff in here. I particularly liked the chance to see some of the now infamous leaders like David Hogg and Emma Gonzalez as just kids. It's really amazing what they set off to do, almost entirely without adult help. I also liked getting a broader view into how their community responded to the tragedy, and how the Parkland kids interacted with some of the victims from older school shootings. I was constantly surprised at how recent the Parkville shooting actually was, just in 2018. I think, in a way, that worked against this book. Cullen isn't drawing from as deep of a reservoir as these other contenders. It's stiff competition, man. Also, I found it disconcerting sometimes how he'd inject himself into the story, when I wanted to focus more on his characters. But all in all, this is a good story. My favorite part was how the Parkland kids came to align themselves with inner city groups, particularly from Chicago, and they then worked to diversify their own ranks. The future is in good hands. Number 5 is How to Be an Antiracist by Ibram X. Kendi. This is an incredible book, and you should definitely read it. It takes a lot to define a philosophy. It takes even more for someone to be as consistently self-critical as Kendi is. Kendi's argument, as I understand it, is that the word racism has become too vague, a word tied to a character flaw. It's a cudgel we can fling at one another. Instead, we should focus our attention back where it belongs, which is to judge our society and our own actions. Supporting anti-racism, Kendi says, is the policy or practice of opposing racism and promoting racial tolerance. The only problem is, I don't think he entirely stuck to his thesis. The book works toward the idea of policy change, but most of his memoir anecdotes are about interpersonal relations. I think they were the most powerful part of the story, and taught me a lot about Black culture, with regards to colorism and nationality, and also intersections with queer and gender identity. Kendi also dipped into his sense of legacy, about who his parents are and were and what they believe, the lessons they imparted on him and the lessons he learned along the way. The policy stuff was more mechanical and distant, and he's still figuring it out, so maybe that's why not everything gels. I think there's more complexity to some group issues than the scope of this book allowed. But it's a provocative step, and it challenges readers to interrogate things and not just accept the status quo. Number 4 is Charged by Emily Bazelon. What a book to be reading right before my primary election in Maryland. This is about the oversized power of prosecutors in the criminal justice system, and about how some of them are trying to reform that system to be more merciful, but others are more old school, and not too concerned about how many people they're carting off to prison. You know, despite the fact that the U.S. has the highest rate of incarcerated citizens in the world. Bazelon goes to humanize her research by following 2 cases. One is a black man, a young black man she calls Kevin, who's living in the projects of Brooklyn, New York, and he's charged for gun possession. The other is Nora, a middle-class white girl from Memphis, Tennessee, and she's charged with murder. At first I raised my eyebrows a bit, because Nora is such an unusual case, unlike Kevin. But Nora, or Nora Jackson, you can look her up, best exemplifies the prejudices and overreach of old-school prosecutors. Kevin got a reformer, and rather than go to jail, he went to a diversion program for rehabilitation. But it was an uphill battle for him, particularly because of the problems that black men regularly face when living in the projects. Rather relevant for these times. And I appreciate the insight that it gave me into gang culture in these areas, with some uncanny similarities to the old-school mentality in some of these prosecutor office cultures. Beyond that, Bazelon followed a bunch of criminal justice professionals and dropped a lot of legalese jargon that could sometimes be a challenge to keep straight. But it packs a punch, and I still think you should read it. I think I'll stop saying you should read it now because I've gotten to my top 3 and that's basically implied. So, number 3 is Underland by Robert Macfarlane. This is the most creative nonfiction book on my list. When I went into this one, I was wondering, would Macfarlane focus on mythology, archaeology? The answer is both, and more. It's a highly scientific book, though it's told through the eyes of a poet. Macfarlane seeks out Earth's physical depressions throughout areas in Europe, whether man-made or natural. He addresses geology, glaciology, nuclear science, history, and humanity. He's this end-of-the-world explorer, always meeting up with other end-of-the-world explorers, whom he describes in glowing terms. They're all incredibly friendly, generous, humble, and of course constantly involved in death-defying risks. I'm grateful that Macfarlane took me to glaciers and caves that I'll likely never personally see in my own life. He described them in such terms of awe. Beyond this, he included one story element that we could take throughout the narrative. He's carrying a casket for a friend who requests that he deposit it in the deepest space that he finds. Intriguing. That being said, other than that, the specifics of most chapter by chapter were so distinct from one another that they could basically be new books. Not everyone is going to be interested in everything unless they're taken with Macfarlane's thesis about it all being Underland. But admittedly, another reason I put this in the number 3 spot is because of its international appeal. Many books on my list are US-centric, despite the BookTube Prize being filled with several international judges. I wanted to make some room for geographical diversity, and I also do think that Underland deserved it. Second is Solitary by Albert Woodfox. I wasn't sure about this one at first. I said some weird things about memoirs in my last video, my recent book haul. And I'll say some weird things here too. I wasn't sure how it would go because Woodfox employed a co-writer, Leslie George. I also was aware through watching BookTube videos that there would be a lot of rambling trial jargon. But Woodfox and George were able to craft a strong voice together. Didn't hurt that the story is so powerful. In April 1972, while serving a prison sentence for armed robbery, Woodfox and 2 of his fellow inmates were wrongly accused of the death of a guard. They were sent to solitary confinement, Woodfox, for 45 years. Like with Charged, this is a story of draconian methods, or in this case really just leaning straight into corruption in the US criminal justice system. But this one focuses more on life in prison, specifically the psychological toll of solitary confinement. It's a visceral, personal tale of injustice, but also perseverance. Woodfox was targeted for his political beliefs because he was a Black Panther. He was advocating for prison rights in a system that usually tries to pit prisoners against one another. He was mostly in Angola prison in Louisiana, with an antebellum past that's chillingly similar to the realities he faced in mid-20th century America. Anyone, hopefully, can feel sympathy for Woodfox's conditions. But there's an internal character layer, too, of how he pulled himself up mentally and solidified his ideals in a hopeless place. Yes, the trial bits were rambly, especially near the end. But that didn't distract me so much as I feared. The story was just too powerful. But finally, my number one is Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb. I kind of expected this. I knew from the off that this would be my kind of story. But hey, I can only be true to myself in this video. And maybe just go back to therapy. Because the crux of this is that therapy isn't just something that exists for patients within mental health institutions. It's a way for ordinary people to confront and uncover things that are bothering them, and then take an honest look at their behaviors and beliefs. Therapy is about uncovering the human condition, which I find very similar to fiction writing. In fact, I referenced this book a bit in a query letter I sent off for a novella that I wrote. Gottlieb, too, is a storyteller, and from before her therapy days, too, when she worked in the television industry. That being said, her forays into her professional past were the weakest part of this book for me. Following her career path just didn't jive with the rest of this book. Her personal journey into therapy did, of course. After a bad breakup, Gottlieb sought help, and ultimately confronted her fears about death. I think it was particularly important to hear her experience because the other patients, or composites of real-life people who were her patients, had more serious backstories. Abuse, child death, etc. But even relatively fortunate people have hardships. And like Gottlieb, I don't subscribe to the whole hierarchy of pain nonsense. I don't think it accomplishes anything, but anywho. This book is teeming with empathy, often for the least likable characters. It's a moving, comprehensive, nuanced look into what makes us human. And speaking as a former patient, it's an intriguing look behind the curtain of the psychology practice. So that about covers it for me. You can find links to my newly posted Goodreads reviews down below. Thank you so much, Robert, for all the hard work you do in facilitating the BookTube Prize. I'm kinda sorry I'm not participating in the semifinals, although I do have other reading projects waiting in the wings. But I'll be keeping my eye out for the next batch of videos in a few months. And who knows, maybe it's time to place some proverbial bets on the winner. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and thank you to all of my fellow judges for your work, and I'll see you next time.